Okay, I gave some of the background while you were offline there, and I think the last point I wanted to make to Matt's line of questioning was one of the long-term goals of this project is to get all of our content structured the same way. Because literally the first Gulfstream airplane flew, I think, in 1958 or 59. We have documents that span those decades that are, literally our first couple airplanes. Those manuals are in scanned PDFs of the original printed documents, and we range all the way from that to some of our earlier models, flight manuals that are still authored in Microsoft Word, and you can imagine how difficult that is to maintain. Some of our legacy flight manuals are authored in structured SGML, and then the G7 and now the G8 moved from that older SGML format to S1000D XML. And then the means by which they're published and some of the features that Bernard's going to show you have all been created with different tools. So our objective, we're not going to go back to the G1 or the G2, but my objective is to go all the way back to probably the classic G4 and migrate all of that content, have it all structured in DITA XML that we've developed and standardized, and have it all publishable through our new publishing template. And I think that will really set the stage for the future capabilities that we're looking at with electronic flight bags and potentially putting all this information on the flight deck. And that's the background.
And in regards to it, I know DITA was something that wasn't immediately on the radar, but ended up going in that direction.
Yeah, it's funny. I've joked with you before that I couldn't even spell XML a little over a year and a half ago. As I mentioned earlier, someone called me and said, "Hey, we got this project for you, and we'll let you fly if you do it." And I didn't care what the project was. All I heard was "and we'll let you fly." So I jumped in the deep end of the pool, and I'm like, "What's XML?" And as I started researching the structures that we currently use, we call it an ATA format, which is it's in SGML and then S1000D. I wasn't really familiar with DITA. I didn't know what it was. As you and I have discussed, I actually looked at maybe adapting a version of the earlier ATA structure because it was relatively simple. One of the objectives of this project was to have the pilots who actually generate the content and engineers who generate the content share the workload in authoring. Our current model is a pilot or an engineer writes an email or creates a Word document, or we get some input from the vendor, and then that goes to tech pubs where they transfer it over either manually or copy paste or whatever. One of our objectives is let's cut out that step and just have the originator of the content put it in the system himself or herself, and then the technical writer can focus on the technical aspects of the content and the structuring and the publishing, etc. So I looked initially at maybe developing a very simple, intuitive XML structure, things like you have an element that says challenge and an element that says reply, et cetera, et cetera. But as AEM emerged as the content management system of choice, and we down selected to that for some of the reasons I talked about earlier, including the built-in workflow for review and approval, which was very, very attractive to us. I learned that the XML documentation add-on only uses DITA. I said, okay, so let me break out Google and start Googling DITA, and was basically like a monkey staring at a football on the Oasis and the Oxygen websites, reading through the DITA spec, and said, okay, I think this is the way we need to go, because there's really no other choice. And then as we started getting into it, and I learned more and more and more, I started discovering the real simplicity and I think relative ease of use. And this is coming from somebody that, again, couldn't spell XML a year and a half ago.
And it was funny when Adobe reached out and brought us in. I think you'd already seen some of the DITA videos we had out there, so it was like, oh yeah, him.
Yeah, it's kind of funny in the digital age, Googling DITA and click on the videos tab and yeah, I'll watch these videos. Yeah, publishing smart, yeah, okay, whatever. This guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Yeah, that was a pretty interesting video. And then 4 months later, he gets brought in on the team.
That's why we pre-record them, so that we don't run into tech glitches, right? There was a lot of design and function that you want to put into the Planebook environment. I've got several screens that sort of demonstrate it, but right through to, hey, I'm just going through and I'm doing my pre-flight inspection all the way through to I'm ready to troubleshoot because something pops up, or I'm in the skies and something pops up. But this page here is sort of the landing page, and imagine holding your iPad up to it. And in some of the subsequent slides, I have 2 pages. But imagine holding it up, and that's what you see in front of you. So can you walk through a little bit of what's here, what the story behind it is?
You might need to switch screen views. I'm still seeing the PowerPoint slide that says design and function.
All right, we'll see if it catches up.
Keep in mind there's a bit of a delay, and so if Patrick is a participant, he's going to have about a 30-second delay probably.
Okay. So Pat.
Yep, I see it. Okay.
All right, perfect.
So essentially what you're seeing is a modification of our print view. So as I mentioned earlier, we're incrementally moving, in the digital direction, but this is essentially a modified version of the print manual that goes onto our Gulfstream iPad application called Planebook. And the intent is to put functionality into the PDF that allows the flight crew to very rapidly navigate the content that's required in flight. This tool is intended for multiple purposes. It's intended for pre-flight planning. You can go to your performance section, your appendices, things like that. It's intended for studying, right? You can sit there on your couch and study up on procedures or read through the operating manual and brush up on techniques and that sort of thing. It's intended to be a reference for ground operations. How do I put fuel or oil or oxygen or water in the airplane? But I think most importantly, it provides all your in-flight procedures, which is where the navigation functions really come into play. Looking back at that tab index page on the cover, you can rapidly navigate towards emergency procedures, abnormal procedures, normal procedures in this case on this slide. Everything is fully hyperlinked. My objective is to try to get to any piece of content, in no more than 3 or 4 taps of your finger, and those taps of your finger should be, very, very intuitive and rapid, so you can get to any procedure within about 3 seconds.
And I've just jumped ahead to the interior pre-flight inspection, but the look and feel that is in the PDF document, how does that compare with what you're seeing inside AEM as an author?
That's a good question. The AEM author view, and again, I apologize for not being logged in as a presenter. I wanted to show you that. The implementation project gave us the out of the box AEM author view. One of the things we've been working with the Adobe team is a CSS update, and their developer they have working on that. She's done some incredible things, and she's actually got the author environment to look almost exactly like this print output. There's a few things she can't do just because of the way the DITA requires certain elements to be placed in certain locations, and Bernard has been able to generate some illusions in the frame maker output that just can't be done with the style sheet, but it's greater than 90%. And the reason why we think that's important is we want the writers and particularly pilots that will be in AEM editing, and particularly people that are participating in the review and approval workflow. The more we can make that environment look like the finished product, the easier it'll be to notice errors and to visualize what the final product's going to look like.
And I've got one of the CAS messages here, and I'll point out to people that this is an interesting challenge because these are different from one specific type of airplane to another, and it's possible that in some of them, certain things do or do not exist. So this is actually dynamically generated at publish time, but what's the goal on the CAS? Like if I'm sitting here and I start to get something popping up on screen.
So again, one of the design objectives was to get to a procedure as rapidly as possible, and a couple of ways you do that, right? So if you're on the front cover, you can click warning, and you end up at this keypad on the left. And a CAS message, for those that don't know, is on your avionics display. There's a window, and depending upon the level of severity of the issue, it will present a color-coded message. White is just a status message saying, something like, hey, your printer's out of paper, whatever. An advisory is something that, it's worth knowing, but you don't really need to do anything about it right now. A caution is something that, hey, you need to know about it right now, and you probably need to do something about it relatively soon. Whereas a red light, a warning light is, hey, you need to take care of this right now. That'd be something like an engine fire, engine failure, things like that. So this keypad is intended to take you to the alphabetized tables of content, again, so you can drill down very, very quickly. One of the interesting, design discussions on this keypad is there were several folks that said, hey, if there's a letter that's not in that section, just delete the button. And it was interesting because I got that input from several people, but you've got to apply some human factors design principles to this, and I ultimately determined that it was preferable to leave the unused letters in the keypad because the human would intuitively be able to scan very rapidly through the 26 letters plus the pound symbol to find a letter if all the keypads were all the same and included all of the letters, rather than going, okay, well, this keypad, I go from J to M, and it would end up actually taking more time to find the letter that we're looking for. So we just decided to gray them out, which is how the existing manual that's produced at Contenta works. But the one feature that we added was at the top of every page, and that's actually in the flight manual and in the operating manual, is you click on those buttons and it takes you to those keypads. So, let's say you're flying along and you're in the operating manual and a CAS message pops up. You could be reading about, cold weather operations because you're flying to Siberia. A message pops up, you click that button, takes you to the keypad, and then two button presses later, you're at the appropriate procedure. So that was the driver for that.
And so in this case, when we get down to the galley smoke side of things, again, the corrective action on the one is go somewhere else and read it. But in other cases, the corrective action is immediately there. So you're getting to the information as quickly as possible. And when you're in the air, those seconds make a dramatic difference in the outcome. So you also had multiple publication templates. The idea of going plain book, print, digital, the potential for review. Do you want to give a little background on the goals here?
Yeah, good point. So for the plain book version, I tried to evolve it from where it is today. The plain book version today looks very much like the print version, except they kind of run all the procedures together to save paper rather than put new individual procedures starting on a separate page. I added the coloring and I used the Gulfstream standard fonts because I wanted to make the manual look, actually make it compliant with our corporate marketing guidelines, so you have the same experience with our flight crew publications content than you do with any other product you get from Gulfstream. The print version is still, interestingly enough, on the operational side, operators can fly with an electronic flight bag, but from a certification side, when the airplane is certified, the certification regulations still require us to generate a hard copy paper manual, and that has to be in the airplane and then we keep that updated and send updates to our operators when revisions are made. So we do have a requirement for a print version, but I just decided that, given the opportunity, since we were creating new templates, I could decouple some of the things between the plain book version and the print version that were not necessarily decoupled before. And then I think the final thing is, as you and I were looking at the print version, and this is the reason I asked the question yesterday about kind of validating transformation of content. The way we have typically been reviewing and approving our content is several humans along the way in the approval chain or review and approval chain would read the new revision and read the change pages and read the log of revisions and manually QA the changes. And we're still finding that despite several people looking at that content, errors still get through. So I've been using Adobe Acrobat compare feature, but as you all probably know that use Adobe products, trying to compare two PDF documents that are created in two different systems using two different published templates are very, very difficult. So I'm working through, how do I confirm that what I had in S1000D and Contenta conveyed over properly to the AEM and DITA and the FrameMaker publishing template. But as I've been thinking through that problem, it made me realize that in the future, once everything is in AEM, if I go from, let's say, the G600, we're getting ready to do revision 5. Well, my intention is I'm going to print a revision 4 out of AEM with what I'm calling a review template, which basically Bernard's going to take the print template that we have right now and just get rid of some of the extraneous information like headers and footers and front matter and some of the other things. And then I'll be able to compare apples to apples in the Adobe Compare tool, which I have found is a very, very useful feature. And instead of humans having to QA everything, I will start with my comparison report, and that will be the foundational element of my review and QA process.
There's some fun stuff in the chat that I'll throw your way in a minute with a couple of questions. Kirk said, this is a little like talking somebody through a landing when they lose visibility in nav, that it's great teamwork with the two of us going back and forth and Matt jumping in to cover when the audio is not playing nicely for either of us. And then there's an ungodly number of references to flight movies that shall remain nameless. A couple of questions that came up, though, DITA customizations. And I know that was something that we had talked about at one point and decided against. We just restricted how people did things in order to have valid DITA with just specific options available to them.
Yeah, let me hit that. There's one final point, anecdote that you and I have shared before is that cover page that you all saw earlier, we call it our tab index page that had the large buttons on the front cover. As I mentioned, our various generations of documents have cover pages like that, and in some cases they were done in PowerPoint, in some cases they were done in Adobe Illustrator. The S1000D manuals generate those through XSLFO, etc. So as we were working through this project, my thought was, hey, I want this styling. I don't know how to do it, but again, being kind of new to all of this, my thought was, you know what? I will just hire a graphic artist to render all of these pages in Adobe Illustrator for all of the manuals, and then just kind of have them sitting in a folder somewhere. And then as I manually construct these manuals at each revision, I'll just select the appropriate tab index page and then manually create the links. Again, I had no idea what I was doing, right? So I text Bernard one day, and he goes, "Wait a second, I got some ideas." And I think you've said you've counseled yourself to get a good night's sleep before you reply to a text with, "Hold on, I got some good ideas."
Yeah, definitely. But it's so cool what we have now.
Yeah, and it turned out to be exactly the perfect solution, particularly the way that it's driven. And you may talk about that with, the way it was sort of a journey of discovery, how we evolved the mechanization of those buttons through having DITA files that use keywords for each of the specific flight manuals in order to drive the output there. So I wanted to make that point because I think that was really it was a great learning and creative experience, and it turned out to be exactly what we needed. But getting back to your next question was about DITA customization. So as I mentioned earlier, I really initially wanted, something that was very, very tailored to our flight manual content. When I first started seeing the DITA, I would see things like paragraph output class equals challenge, and I'm like, that's totally confusing. Pilots that are writing this stuff, they're not going to know. I just want a challenge paragraph. And there was a few things I wanted like that, and Bernard cautioned me, I don't know, probably at least a dozen times, like you don't really want to do specialization if you can get away with it, and here's why. And ultimately I came around to his way of thinking, because his fundamental point was any DITA processor that's processing DITA 1.3 will be able to process our content and create the output as specified by the output processor. Whereas if you start specializing, then you've got to start customizing your output processor. So I learned to live with it, and and now it's fairly simple. But I'm glad I didn't push harder, and I'm glad Bernard didn't give in.
Thanks. This, by the way, is the mechanism we came up with for those buttons. I'm going to move this over for a second. This is this one here is for the operating manual instead of for the AFM. I think I've got the AFM in here as well. Yeah, so the buttons in the background, things like general, normal, limitations. What we have is a location for general. And we know that links out to the preface file. Limitations and normal point to specific files as well. So each of those uses the prop type, and it's using straight DITA for a properties table, but it uses prop type in order to tell FrameMaker, hey, look, if somebody is putting in a link to this place, then that button marked general goes to that location. And now instead of having to have somebody with the skills to do the programming or the graphic design or a lot of code editing, they can go in and update the cross-reference. If they change the name in AEM, it maintains everything. When they pull it down for publishing, they know that the button for general is going to be where this thing links to, regardless of what the original name is. And the really cool part for the team longer term is from a visual standpoint, if it turns out that they want to change something. And yesterday, Pat said, hey, we've got PRCDR for procedure. And you said your boss didn't like it, change it to procedures. And it was 20 seconds, and we had updated it throughout the publication. So making changes, because we're in the FrameMaker world and we're not sitting there diving into code, especially for visually rich types of content, it's just so much faster to make the changes. And I'm going to skip ahead here again to where we were a minute ago. But we looked at it from our end for the publishing at the toolkit and the FrameMaker side. And FrameMaker became the winner when we started looking at some of the complexities of design and layout and the number of times that we could expect to see change requests coming along for a collection of manuals. If it was a one-off, if it was a single look and feel document, and we needed, a standard 8.5 by 11 with a 1-inch margin, sure, it works. But we also had a lot of additional functionality that we wanted to get in there and long-term make it as easy as possible. So what we now have is an environment where we can work with content and do, reuse and publishing. So the piece that we started to pull together was that resulting look and feel. And as an example, acronyms and abbreviations. We know that that's going to be reused. And this chunk of information, you can see the tabs across the top. It has the OM. So in the one manual, there's an introduction that mentions the operating manual has been prepared for this purpose. It has these acronyms. and this is a print look and feel. We can take that exact same chunk of information and we can go over and we can say, all right, what about the same acronyms inside the AFM? So in the AFM, we have the same acronym and abbreviation, but it comes after a different chunk of information because it is a different manual. We have one piece of reusable information. We have two different templates that are applied for two different publications. So we start to get into sort of compounding the ideas of multiple look and feel, multiple chunks of information. We can see the difference on the first PDF page here between a caution and an advisory, so that at a glance, you know exactly what it is that you're spotting. And that gave us a look and feel type of an environment as a goal. And I'll show you in a few minutes the FrameMaker side, but wow, I've got a massive windstorm kicking through here, and it just like blew a piece of plywood halfway across the yard that was down on the ground. That's impressive. Some of the challenges that we had to overcome, you mentioned the idea of the front matter buttons coming in from different software tools, the customization of the elements and attributes, the appearance issues. Those were biggies, but it was also overcoming some of these in regards to the people involved, the software, the restrictions and limitations that were there at times. And those are things that definitely picked up and possessed a life of their own in some cases. But at the end of the day, I think we hit those nicely. Anything jump to mind, Patrick, that goes beyond those that we've mentioned so far?
It's interesting. This was very much an iterative effort, and so I think that there were some structural things. Case in point, if you look at the numbering of the paragraphs, we follow a specific numbering scheme, and originally we had decided to put that as an other props attribute at the concept level for every topic. Just put the numbering there, and then that's how the table of contents and how each topic would get the paragraph numbering. And then we discovered the hard way that if we're reusing content across various manuals, that wouldn't work very well. And then the other thing we figured out, again, the hard way is, well, what if you have to insert a new procedure, and maybe this is a, requirements kind of thing we should have thought about early, but, ultimately we realized that there would be a lot of manual effort to maintain the numbering if we kept it at the concept level. So, Bernard and his XML guru, Rick, who his contribution to the success of this project cannot be overstated, I think. Ultimately moved that functionality up to, first we talked about putting it at the chapter map level, and ultimately that functionality was moved up to the main map level, and that's worked out really, really well, again, from a long-term maintainability perspective. And, from an automation perspective, my goal is that my writers get in, they put the content, and, perfection would be they edit the content, they update their maps, they update the version numbers of the maps and the version numbers of the associated topics. They click a button and they're done. And I think we're pretty close to that.
Yeah. Pat, by the way, those little glitches that we found today are resolved. Nathan's been going through, and he's publishing close to 2,000 pages from source to finished in about 20 minutes or so in order to rebuild these. There's a question in the chat, by the way. There's a couple that we've answered along the way, and I saw you type some in, which is great. Metadata, adding specific metadata to topics so that we can build the index, the QRP. So I've got a file here in AEM that I figure you can talk to a little bit.
Yeah, you want to turn the tags on?
Yep.
So yeah, this was another really interesting design question. We, in the footer of each procedure, or checklist or topic or what have you, we put certain information like which revision of the flight manual was this topic last updated? You know, is it approved by the FAA or not? What was the date of approval? That sort of thing. So we had to come up with a mechanism to do that because the S1000D construct and the publishing process completely different. So even though that information was carried in the S1000D and we were able to convey it over in the migration process, we had to figure out where are we going to put it and how are we going to mechanize it, because we've also got metadata that goes into the front matter pages as a function of the particular revision date and revision level and that sort of thing. So we end up with map level keywords that drive the dates and the revision levels that go into the front matter, but then each topic carries its own metadata and also change history. I mean, one of the things that's very important for us is as we change a procedure, you know, oftentimes the rationale for why things get changed get lost. And so we wanted to make sure we had mechanisms built in to capture change rationale. And so one of the ways we're doing that is through the use of the prologue metadata, and then using revision commentary tags at the step level. So if a step changes, then you know, we can put in some commentary there for rationale and have that there for historical purposes if we ever have to go back and ask why did we change a procedure. One of the neat things, and this was an interesting design challenge, was how do we know, you know, the right content to go into the footer? Well, what Bernard ended up doing was developing a rule in the FrameMaker template that says, hey, I don't care if you have 15 change items in your prologue, I'm always going to go to the first one, and that's the one that I'm going to take to populate the data in the footer. But the other challenge with that was change bars. How do we turn on change bars for the next revision, but make sure we turn them off for the follow-on revision? Well, that's where you refer to the front matter. What's the current revision level? The publishing template says, what's the current revision level in the front matter keyword? Oh, it's revision 6. Okay, well, anywhere where there's a rev tag in the content that has an integer value of 6, put a change bar on that element. And if it doesn't say 6 and it had a change bar before, the change bars miraculously go away. That was something I wanted automated as well, because that could also be a very labor-intensive process if it wasn't.
And one of the questions was, with the different revisions coming along, with reviewers going through material with different authors, how do you keep the same tone so that the content has that consistent writing style? Because I know when we've looked at your historical content and we've looked at your modern, updated content, some of the older stuff has a paragraph, which is now broken out into 4 discrete steps. How do you get consistency on that?
I'd say that's one of those like standing on the shoulder of giants kind of thing. So with the G7 or with the G7, which is the G500 and the G600 family of aircraft, when they went to S1000D, the project pilots created that structure. And in the last couple of years, we've had folks write a design guide for how we write procedures. We've never had one before. So now we have a structure that we could build upon and say, okay, that's going to be our standardized structure. And now we have written design guidelines that go down to very specific detail. You know, for example, the response should always be, if you're activating a control or something or a switch, that the response should always be exactly the label in the cockpit that you would see when you actuate that control or switch. That's just one example of the many rules. So between our design guidelines / style guide and now having a standardized topic or procedure template, we can guarantee, there's still going to be some individual styles and how people write notes, warning, cautions, and some other things. But we're trying to minimize individuality. And the way we've mechanized that in the DITA is we created templates for just plain old generic topics, like in your limitations section or your performance section. But then for procedures, we have a procedure template that takes all the guesswork out of it. Nobody has to build a procedure from scratch. You don't have to copy and paste from the procedure and have issues that that we saw when we tried with having two procedures that have the exact same ID. Oops, that doesn't work well in the publishing process. So you create a template and then you just enter the content. And then I've created probably, I don't know, almost 12.5 snippets that covers every single type of combination of elements you possibly have in a procedure. So all you got to do is drag and drop, and if there's a place where you need to enter content, you enter it. But we've taken all of the manual labor out of creating the XML for the authors.
There were definitely publishing things based on the requirements that you had that we really wanted to dive into. I know there was more than one delivery, the print, the digital, the plain book, the review. On our side, we really focused on plain book first because I think it's the most challenging and also the most interesting. But what was really nice is once we had plain book working and you said, all right, now I need a way to get a print version of it, it was basically a subset. And I showed that set of slides a little earlier. So it's not as functional because it's planned for being a paper version that's printed, or it's planned for being, hey, out of the box, here's what you get. But there's really cool functionality in plain book, the review copy so that you can compare it. The page layout is incredible in some of the cases, just automating things like next page or interactive buttons that go across multiple maps and jump back and forth and let you control it. The different sources, we tried to get a FrameMaker document that could be used for multiple manuals and then to automate it. So for those who are here for the FrameMaker side, and that addresses hopefully the question of which tool did you use, a couple of things in the FrameMaker side of things. What we did was we took a DITA map. So if you're looking at the left side of my screen, I'm hoping that you're seeing that G500 issue 1 AFM DITA map, and it has a collection of content in it. Part of that includes limitations, and as I start to drill down into the limitations, I can get to things like the active runway conditions. So inside there, I'm taking a look, I get to the structure view in the FrameMaker world, and it shows me DITA. For those of you that are looking for the DITA geeky side of things, far right of the screen, that is your structure view. We have the prologue information that we talked about earlier with the change history list. Pat mentioned if there's more than one change item in here, we're going to take the first one and use it to drive the footer. You'll notice as a standalone, the header above warning, caution, advisory doesn't give us a lot of info because it's just a file. This is showing what it looks like inside the template. So this is the author world. If somebody was to go in and work inside FrameMaker, and of course they don't have to. They have the option of working exclusively inside AEM if that's the preference. And then we added a Gulfstream menu, and we wanted to make it easy, not only for the publishing side, but also for the troubleshooting, because there are times that as human beings, we break things and we want to do it more than once. So when we did go in and start working with it, we built a log file. And early on, that really helped. So the log file would go in and it would tell us, hey, there's certain things that I'm not finding, or there's procedures that I'm going through. And as we start going in and performing those, what we end up getting is results. And the results are going to be links that we don't have because we're not building an engine run handbook, but we have one template. So we have expected errors. We go in and we see that certain things like normal operations or preface might not be working. So we could go back to the document I showed you earlier and troubleshoot it and say, what is that thing named? Is it the correct expectation? And if not, then we didn't have to dive into 2,000 lines of code to analyze. We were able to look inside a single file, find what the issue was, troubleshoot it, fix it, and then standardize that moving forward. And the good thing is once it's all standardized moving forward, we can go in and we can individually run the pieces. But far more practical is to come along and say, look, I have a map and I need a print version of it, or I need a digital version of it, or I need the plain book version of it. And in a absolute literal sense, a few hours ago today, we went through, took this document, pulled it down from AEM, put it into a folder, opened just this one map, clicked Gulfstream convert DITA map to plain book. It took about 20 minutes. And yes, it is 20 minutes of mindless staring at a screen, watching stuff churn away in front of you and hoping for the best. But that 20 minutes results in a net document that is the FrameMaker document with the front matter, the list of effective pages, every single map published as an entire collection of content. And then we go in and we save that as a PDF document. And the resulting PDF, give or take, is 1,800 pages long. And it has all of the functionality that we were talking about. It has the interactive buttons on the front page built dynamically because we have a file path document, a DITA file that the people who work with DITA can go in and tweak if it changes. And they have a link to a document that historically was called general, or historically was called preface, or historically was called introduction. They don't have to go back and rename and change everything and try to fix all of the source documents. They can remap in one step. When you're inside the document, you start using those hyperlinks. You need to go to the warning, the caution, or the advisory in a moment. You tap. You can see in the bookmarks that all of the subsequent pages have those cast message buttons across the top, the warning, the caution, the advisory, and a link back to this home page. There's still more stuff that is in mind for Pat. There's goals to go beyond just doing business the way business is currently done. And from my standpoint, I'm really happy to see that it's not just a one and done. You're looking at long term. How do you make the documentation better? And that should be our overall goal, right? Let's talk to the audience. And the audience changes. Your audience consuming this is pilots, but your audience creating it is people who are in the TechCom side of things. So a couple of goals from your side, Pat. I'm just asking if you can go in and hit up a couple of these and give a little more input on it as we wrap up, because we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Yeah, you mentioned one, and thanks for showing the FrameMaker in the 3 views there with the maps and the authoring environment, the destruction environment. My goal is, we're kind of walking before we run. Our objective is to have our tech writers working in the FrameMaker environment, with that same look and feel that you get in the output by using the templates, so they can very rapidly see the results right there, and they can publish immediately without having to import, that sort of thing. So working back and forth with the FrameMaker to AEM connector, it's not something we've done yet, because we still have training to do, and the writers are getting more and more familiar working with AEM. It's been about a month that they've been working it, and they really like it. One of the other things is, again, we haven't started running it yet, but the intent is to do end-to-end electronic workflows. So we send it through the AEM review and approval workflow using the project feature, and it literally goes from us to what's called our ODA, which is kind of the Gulfstream people that wear the FAA hat. And then from there, it goes to the FAA. They approve it. It comes back to the ODA. The ODA digitally signs it in the system, and it comes back to us, and we literally push a button and publish it. That's part of, in the future, we want to get out of the PDF business and go purely to an app that's driven by the underlying XML, via HTML or something like that, and be able to do very, very rapid updates electronically from create it, push it for review, get it approved, digitally signed, and then push a publish button and push it to the application without generating PDFs and that sort of thing. And then another objective is in the future, as we look to try to get this information and checklist functionality on the avionics, is do the same thing, push a button, generate the file that can work with the avionics, and it's literally, you know, at the speed of light. So it's ambitious, but I think, you know, based on the tools that we're using, it's within the realm of doability. So.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I think, again, the takeaways, we wanted to talk about DITA and FrameMaker automation, and I showed you the actual things that are happening at the end here. But design and function really are key to making sure that everything from what the author builds through to the consumer of the content comes together the way it is, and definitely a lot of things to think about. I'll leave this up on screen. It's got our contact information on a QR code. You can just scan it. Again, thanks to the Adobe crew, to the bloggers, Patrick, and everybody at Gulfstream. Very much appreciate your time, and to everybody who's attended and given questions. Pat and I will take a few minutes. We'll check the Q&A and try to respond to them there as well. So, and it's funny, I live across the airplane. There's an airplane coming in right now.
I know we're over time, but let me answer Matt's question about S1000D. What was the discussion? So I looked at S1000D, and again, I couldn't spell XML a year and a half ago, right? I've said that a couple of times. In order to try to orient myself, I compared our earlier SGML format, and I compared our S1000D format in preparation for the design activity with Adobe and Bernard about, you know, what was going to be the future standard, because we had two XML structures and I needed to go to a standardized structure. And I read literally, not word for word, but I read through the entire 3,500 page S1000D specification, and I realized how very powerful it was. But when I looked at our XML code, there is just a tremendous amount of overhead that was completely unnecessary. You know, a challenge and response in DITA that is 2 paragraph elements would be multiple, you know, S1000D nested elements, you know, crew drill, then crew drill step, then you know, and go down so many levels. That much overhead, number one, was just incredibly complex, and I thought it was overkill, and it was very apparent to me that it was unnecessary for what we needed to do, and I wanted to get to as minimalist an approach as we could, and did. Perfect. It worked out perfectly for that.
Yeah, with S1000D being an aerospace and defense standard, I had that curiosity since you mentioned it a little bit earlier.
Thanks again, Matt.
Yeah,
thanks, Stefan, and thanks, Pat. Take care.
Stefan, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bernard. Thank you so much, Patrick, for giving us these insights.